Consequently, they were far more dreaded than the wild boars, with which, as with every other sort of game, the neighbouring woods were plentifully stocked. Well aware of the danger they ran, the party watched the herd narrowly and distrustfully, and would have galloped on, but this would only have provoked pursuit, and the wild cattle were swifter than any horses. Suddenly a milk white bull trotted out from the rest of the herd, bellowing fiercely, lashing his sides with his tail, and lowering his head to the ground as if meditating an attack. His example was speedily followed by the others, and the whole herd began to beat the ground and roar lustily. Much alarmed by these hostile manifestations, the party were debating whether to stand the onset, or trust to the fleetness of their steeds for safety, when, just as the whole herd, with tails erect and dilated nostrils, were galloping towards them, assistance appeared in the persons of some 10 or a dozen mounted prickers, who, armed with long poles pointed with iron, issued with loud shouts from an avenue opening upon the chase. At sight of them, the whole herd wheeled round and fled, but were pursued by the prickers till they were driven into the depths of the furthest thicket. 6 of the prickers remained watching over them during the day, in order that the royal hunting party might not be disturbed, and the woods echoed with the bellowing of the angry brutes. While this was going forward, the squire and his companions, congratulating themselves on their narrow escape, galloped off, and entered the long avenue of sycamores from which the prickers had emerged. At the head of a steep ascent, partly hewn out of the rock, and partly skirted by venerable and majestic trees, forming a continuation of the avenue, rose the embattled gate tower of the proud edifice they were approaching, and which now held the monarch of the land, and the highest and noblest of his court as guests within its walls. From the top of the central tower of the gateway floated the royal banner, while at the very moment the party reached the foot of the hill, they were saluted by a loud peal of ordnance discharged from the side towers, proclaiming that the King had arisen; and as the smoke from the culverins wreathed round the standard, a flourish of trumpets was blown from the walls, and martial music resounded from the court. Roused by these stirring sounds, Nicholas spurred his horse up the rocky ascent, and, followed closely by his companions, who were both nearly as much excited as himself, speedily gained the great gateway, a massive and majestic structure, occupying the centre of the western front of the mansion, and consisting of 3 towers of great strength and beauty, the mid tower far overtopping the other 2, as in the arms of old Castile, and sustaining, as was its right, the royal standard. On the platform stood the trumpeters, with their silk-fringed clarions, and the iron mouths of the culverins, which had been recently discharged, protruded through the battlements. The arms and motto of the Hoghtons, carved in stone, were placed upon the gateway, with the letters C.H., the initials of the founder of the tower. Immediately above the arched entrance was the sculptured figure of a knight slaying a dragon. In front of the gateway a large crowd of persons were assembled, consisting of the inferior gentry of the neighbourhood, with their wives, daughters, and servants, clergymen, attorneys, surgeons, farmers, and tradesmen of all kinds, from the adjoining towns of Blackburn, Preston, Chorley, Haslingden, Garstang, and even Lancaster. Representatives, in some sort or other, of almost every town and village in the county might be found among the motley assemblage, which, early as it was, numbered several hundreds, many of those from the more distant places having quitted their homes soon after midnight. Admittance was naturally sought by all, but here the same rule was observed as at the park gate, and no one was allowed to enter even the base court without authority from the lord of the mansion. The great gates were closed, and 2 files of halberdiers were drawn up under the deep archway, to keep the passage clear, and quell disturbance in case any should occur, while a gigantic porter, stationed in front of the wicket, rigorously scrutinised the passes. These precautions naturally produced delay, and though many of the better part of the crowd were entitled to admission, it was not without much pushing and squeezing, and considerable detriment to their gay apparel, that they were enabled to effect their object. The comfort of those outside the walls had not, however, been altogether neglected by Sir Richard Hoghton, for sheds were reared under the trees, where stout March beer, together with cheese and bread, or oaten cakes and butter, were freely distributed to all applicants, so that if some were disappointed, few were discontented, especially when told that the gates would be thrown open at noon, when, during the time the king and the nobles feasted in the great banquet hall, they might partake of a wild bull from the park, slaughtered expressly for the occasion, which was now being roasted whole within the base court. That the latter was no idle promise, they had the assurance of thick smoke rising above the walls, laden with the scent of roast meat; and, moreover, they could see through the wicket a great fire blazing and crackling on the green, with a huge carcase on an immense spit before it, and a couple of turn broaches basting it. As Nicholas and his companions forced their way through the crowd, which was momently receiving additions as fresh arrivals took place, the squire recognised many old acquaintances, and was nodding familiarly right and left, when he encountered a woman's eye fixed keenly upon him, and to his surprise beheld Nance Redferne. Nance, who had lost none of her good looks, was very gaily attired, with her fine chestnut hair knotted in ribands, her stomacher similarly adorned, and her red petticoat looped up so as to display an exceedingly trim ankle and small foot; and under other circumstances Nicholas might not have minded staying to chat with her, but just now it was out of the question, and he hastily turned his head another way. As ill luck, however, would have it, a stoppage occurred at that moment, during which Nance forced her way up to him, and taking hold of his arm, said in a low tone, "You mun take me in, ye squire." "Take you in wi' me? Impossible!" cried Nicholas. "No, it's no impossible," rejoined Nance, pertinaciously. "You con do it, an you shan. You owe me a good turn, and mun repay it now." "But why the devil do you want to go in?" cried Nicholas, impatiently. "You know the king's a sworn enemy of all witches, and among this concourse some one's sure to recognise you and betray you. I cannot answer for your safety if I do take you in. In my opinion, you were extremely unwise to venture here at all." "Ne'er heed my wisdom or my folly, but do as I bid you, or you'll repent it," said Nance. "Why, you can get in without my aid," observed the squire, trying to laugh it off. "You can easily fly over the walls." "I left my broomstick at home," replied Nance. "But no more jesting. Will you do it?" "Well, I suppose I must," replied Nicholas; "but I wash my hands of the consequences. If ill comes of it, I am not to blame. You mun go in as Doll Wango, that is, as a character in the masque to be enacted to night. Do you mark?" Nance signified that she perfectly understood him. The whole of this hurried discourse, conducted in an undertone, passed unheard and unknown by the bystanders. Just then an opening took place amid the crowd, and the squire pushed through it, hoping to get rid of his companion; but he hoped in vain, for, clinging to his saddle, she went along with him. They were soon under the deep groined and ribbed arch of the gate, and Nance would have been here turned back by the foremost halberdier, if Nicholas had not signified, somewhat hastily, that she belonged to his party. The man smiled, and offered no further opposition, and the gigantic porter next advancing, Nicholas exhibited his pass to him, which, appearing sufficiently comprehensive to procure admission for Richard and Sherborne, they instantly availed themselves of the licence, while the squire fumbled in his doublet for a further order for Nance. At last he produced it, and after reading it, the gigantic warder exclaimed, with a smile illumining his broad features, "Ah, I see. This is an order for his worship, Sir Richard, to admit a certain woman who is to enact Doll Wango in the masque. This is she, I suppose?" he added, looking at Nance. "Ay, ay," replied the squire. "A comely wench, by the mass!" exclaimed the porter. "Open the gate." "No, not yet, good porter, till my claim be adjusted," cried another woman, pushing forward, quite as young and comely as Nance, and equally gaily dressed. "I am the real Doll Wango, though I be generally known as Dame Tetlow. The squire engaged me to play the part before the king, and now this saucy hussy has taken my place. But I'll have my rights, that I will." "Odds heart! Two Doll Wangos!" exclaimed the porter, opening his eyes. "Two! Nay, belady, but there be three," exclaimed an immensely tall, stoutly proportioned woman, stepping up to the increased confusion of the squire, and the infinite merriment of the bystanders, whose laughter had been already excited by the previous part of the scene.
Didna yo tell me at Myerscough to come here, squire, and I, Bess Bow.